My name is Axel Bard Bringéus, and I'm an operating partner at EQT Ventures. EQT Ventures is a large multi-stage venture capital fund focusing on Europe mainly. And prior to EQT Ventures, I spent 7 years at Spotify, where I ran the global markets team, which was responsible for international expansion and managing the geographic markets. I mean, marketplaces can be extremely powerful and can become very, very large and completely change the dynamics of a specific industry. But on the flip side, they're very, very hard to build. You have the sort of chicken and egg situation of supply and demand that you have to manage. It's sort of transactional revenue that you need to make sure is repeatable, and you need to retain users at with positive unit economics. So for that reason, because they're so challenging to build, we're obviously looking for exceptional founders. And what we like, especially when we look at B2B marketplaces, is founders that have domain experience in the supply chain or whatever it might be that they want to tackle with a marketplace model. But then on top of that, in general, we want to make sure that the marketplace model just makes sense, meaning that on the supply side, the marketplace model leads to substantial economic value for the supply, and then on the demand side, that it is a transaction, or so to speak, that has a sort of high frequency and can become a habitual transaction, because only then does a marketplace also make sense. I think we see, and there will be more things happening in industries such as healthcare, and broadly speaking when it comes to healthcare services, but also looking at healthcare or care supplies, markets that have been extremely intransparent in the past and with many intermediaries, and markets that have been sort of regulated, or at least semi-regulated, but also in industrial goods and logistics and so forth. And in many cases there might be such niche verticals that even we as investors would not have maybe thought about a particular market, but since industrial markets are large, even though these marketplace niches might be very niched, there's a big opportunity there. In most cases, but not in all cases, for us it is important that the company can scale geographically, and that it's not sort of limited only to its home market. I think there are some markets, if you look at Germany, real estate or similar, that are large enough to build a unicorn company on just that. But we want to make sure that the company can scale beyond the borders of just the first country. And then many factors go into that. But for example, to make sure that there are some network effects that create a spillover from one market to the other, so that you don't have to just set up a completely new shop in the next country in a sort of manual way. You will probably have a playbook from your first market, but you need to sort of redo it again. You need to create the supply and demand again, which might have completely new challenges in a new market. So that's why it is obviously beneficial if there's sort of spillover demand or spillover supply from one market to the other. Otherwise, it's sort of like setting up a new business in every country. Obviously, you can get operational leverage by sharing the costs, and you get better efficiency because you have this idea of how to repeat it. I think what we find interesting is marketplaces that go full stack, sort of, where in the beginning, when the first online marketplaces came about, they were just transactional clearing houses, more or less. Everything else happened off platform. But with technological advances, more and more of the sort of consumption experience is actually controlled by the marketplace. You have you know, open door and similar models where there's also sort of real assets involved, or other models where the marketplace completely controls the consumer and controls the consumer experience and more or less sort of commoditizes the underlying supplier. So that, I think, is very interesting, these more complex asset-heavy models. And then on the flip side, there's obviously the promise of decentralized contracts, eliminating the need for sort of the evil middleman to be there and just as a rent seeker. But obviously, the more integrated marketplaces become, and the more full stack they become, the more value on top of just the simple transaction they provide. So hopefully we'll see things diverging into two directions when there's not much more need than just a clearinghouse, so to speak, for the transaction. That can be done through decentralized contracts, but then on the flip side, that these more full stack marketplaces will be there to create value for supply and demand.